Well, hello, everybody. So good to see all of you here. Thank you for joining us on this 49th episode of the Kitchen Table Conversations that we've been having with the Men and Masculine Folks Network from folks around the state of Minnesota. And eventually and occasionally, we invite other people from outside of the state to join us in this conversation as well, because it's so needed for us to understand the diversity and the diaspora of how people navigate uh, what it means to be healthy in our own lives as masculine identified people and men people or male folks in our community. So I'm so happy that today we have really awesome guest, Matice Moore from the Brown Boi Project, and they'll introduce themselves to all of us moving forward here. And then we'll talk a little bit about the conversation we're going to have today, which is an exciting conversation, I think, that we're having. And the first that I'm hearing of it. I know I've been thinking about it for a long time, but definitely the first on a public facing venue, I should say, such as the kitchen table here. I'll let the other folks introduce themselves, our regulars, I should say, our regular table mates introduce themselves, and then we'll go to Matice last.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Felix Martinez. My pronouns are he, him, and his, or él in Spanish. I'm reporting today from the Esperanza United headquarters. Super excited to be here, to be with all of you guys. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Serrano Robinson, he, him, his pronouns, calling out of Duluth. And I haven't been here in a couple of weeks, so definitely glad to be back as well.
And hey, everybody, I'm Sean Hayes. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Also coming to you live from Menace Peacemakers, just one floor down from Serrano. So glad to be back.
Yeah, it's an honor, y'all. My name is Matice, as Pheng said, and I'm currently the project director for the Brown Boi Project. I am talking to you all from my home in Detroit, Michigan.
Very cool. Appreciate it. And yes, thank you, definitely, Serrano. And for those of you who are joining us live in this moment, definitely engage in the conversation with us always. We always appreciate that. Now all of us can actually, via StreamYard, monitor the chats that are coming in and the comments that are coming in. So we want to all of us engage with all of you. And for those of you who are viewing us afterwards, definitely chime in your thoughts as well too, and send them our direction so that we can keep on having these conversations. It is our 49th, and next time we will be meeting, it'll be our 50th. So I'm excited about what will come about in that conversation. But today's conversation, obviously, is really, I think, I want to say meaningful and really about like what does it really look like when we talk about masculinity in a very broad sense, and when we have a vision of what masculinity is. I was sharing with Matice that how do we define masculinity not in relationship to patriarchy, not in relationship to femme bodies or femme identities or expressions or queer expressions and identities. When it stands alone by itself, what does it really mean? And I think the conversation Matice and I had, and they could share more about how they arrived at their understanding of what it means for masculinity to be a standalone by itself, and defining it that way, and being able to live in the full power of that in a way that is actually healthy. I think it begs the question we often talk about, like here in this platform, about what it means to be healthy, right? And we talk about current events and issues. But what is that really, right? And I think Matice, you share that as well too. So just wanted to give that little brief framing, and then I'll have Matice share a little bit here about how they came to the conversation that they and I had. And the other part is that we've known each other for the last 2 years because we were a part of this cohort experience, and will continue to be in relationship with one another moving forward as well too. And so this is just the beginning, but we wanted to really have this conversation here about masculinity as a standalone by itself. What does that look like and mean? So hand it over to Matisse, and then we'll move the conversation from there as usual. Very organic, always.
Thanks, Pheng. I appreciate that framing and the invitation to join y'all for this conversation today. And I realized I left out my pronouns. So my pronouns are they and them. And it's probably easiest if I get into like how I came into understanding my own masculinity, my relationship to masculinity. And so I think that as a very small young person, like I, would look to my dad and my brother and what they were doing and try to do the same things that they were doing. I think my first like understanding or memory of gender, this is a question that I often like to ask groups when I'm facilitating, is like, how did you first, realize that gender was a thing, that gender difference existed in some way, shape, or form? And what often happens is that folks who are coming from, like identities considered oppressed or who, that experience oppression will remember the first time that it was something that shut them down or, like made them feel bad. Whereas other folks would be like, oh, I noticed when I went to school that there were other people who were different, or I noticed that in my family, the girls were treated differently. And for me, it was this memory of really wanting to play outside with my shirt off, right? And chasing my brother, into the front yard, and my dad specifically scolding me and being like, you need to go inside and put a shirt on, and I had to be really small, like maybe 4 years old or something like that. And I just felt like there was something wrong. I was like, oh, I have to cover myself. You guys get to be out here with your shirts off, but I don't get to be. And, I obviously, as a grown adult person, know that there was a very protective impulse or inspiration behind that scolding. But as a child, I just took it as like a negative thing, and started to ascribe negative associations with girlhood, womanhood, femininity, especially as I experienced other forms of harm growing up that were, gender-based violence in their nature. But as an older person, I guess it was towards the end of my first romantic relationship where my partner said to me, "You're not a woman," right? And I came out of that conversation, it was during our breakup moment, right? So of course it was like, I was having a lot of feelings anyways, because we were having a breakup conversation. But I was like, we never talked about my gender in the 3 years that we'd been together. And now in this moment, my gender is actually a major topic that I need to do something, with. I need to reconcile with this assertion that she's making, observing me and my behavior. And so it was shortly after that that I found the Brown Boi Project. And I was like, oh, here are all these folks, who many of which are queer identified, but, Brown Boi engages across the gender spectrum. So there are cis men in the space, cisgendered men. And so I'm assuming that this is language that we're all familiar with using. But, men whose gender identity aligns with their sexual identity, or their sex assigned at birth. And then trans folks, gender nonconforming folks who are identified as cis women, but recognizing that they have a relationship with masculinity. And it was in that space that I really started to use the label masculine of center as a way to understand my gender expression. And so what brings me to the conversation with Pheng is like, maybe 8 years after doing my Brown Boi experience, I was actually in a conversation about healthy masculinity. And I found myself struggling in a couple of different ways. One of the ways was that over the course, I think, of time, I think of like changes with my body and just changes with the ways in which I was relating with other people. I realized that I couldn't locate masculinity in myself, like in my body. Like, what is masculinity in my body? I didn't feel like I had a solid or stable sense of it. And then I also struggled with, because at this particular conversation, there were a number of folks who identified as activists, as organizers, as feminists, and they were asking about the utility of masculinity, right? Like, what is the utility of it? And I was like, oh, I can't answer that question. And the panelists seemed like they were also struggling with the question, like they basically came back to, because somebody else was like, what exactly is healthy masculinity? And they, you know, responded with like, well, I teach my sons not to harm women, right? And that's healthy masculinity. Or the folks who were on the panel that were assigned female at birth, they were like, well, my existence, because I'm a queer person, you know, and I'm queering the binary, and so that's healthy masculinity. And I just was struggling with those responses. You know, like, I don't think that they were wrong, but I was like, there has to be something that engages us on a deeper level than these moments where, you know, like, we're doing the right thing, which is teaching kids not to harm each other, you know, and or like allowing our full expression despite the rules and norms of the binary. And so because I had this job with the Brown Boi Project that I wasn't ready to step away from, I was like, I have to reconcile with my relationship to masculinity if I'm going to do this work. And it was really in this question of, you know, can we define a masculinity beyond patriarchy, that I really started to lean into the creative opportunity to do that. Like, how do we define masculinity beyond patriarchy? And so, you know, in a number of conversations, we started using the word liberatory masculinity, or the phrase liberatory masculinity, in the sense of like, how do we look at healthy masculinity as being a lifelong process that we follow, that we fall in and out of, right? So if we recognize that, you know, as folks socialize at birth under patriarchy, you know, like, how are we working consistently, regardless of like how healthy we feel in the moment, to always be engaging in a liberatory way in our communities, right? And seeing the process of liberation as a lifelong process. And then I think another aspect, and then, you know, we ended up just defining a number of principles that I can go into, but I wanted to kind of stop there because I've been talking for a long time now to say that that was, you know, basically how we landed on liberatory masculinity. I will also say that from our community, we were challenged by a number of folks who were engaged in like transformative justice education or abolitionist work, who were like, what is your politic? You know, and we really need to be grounding our masculinity or our work around masculinity in a politic. And so we use the phrase liberatory masculinity to also try to align ourselves with feminism, with decolonial practice, with, you know, abolitionist theory with regards to like abolishing the prison system in this country and seeing gender as one of those constructs that needs to be abolished, or the gender binary as one of those constructs that needs to be abolished. And disability justice is another major emphasis that we're trying to align with as a lifelong practice. Thank you. I don't know if I should be phrasing this as a question in terms of trying to make it more of a dialogue, but that is like I said, that's how I am coming into this. And, you know, there's more ideas and more to say, but I wanted to pause there, you know, if y'all have any feedback or to make this more of a dialogue.
I'll just hop in to say there was a lot that you were sharing, Matice, that I resonated with. And also, you know, it's like bringing up some memories for me as being a small child and like what that was like for me being assigned female at birth, and also thinking about my little one who just turned 4 on Monday and how she is like free and wild and free and wants to just be naked, you know, diaper needs a diaper on, but you know, and how that, you know, how do I maneuver through that as a parent, and thinking about safety and thinking about how do we allow her to express her full self, and so, and then also just to say like, yeah, these conversations are definitely very organic, and I think it's interesting that we all sort of just paused because you dropped a lot of good stuff there that I'm like, holy moly, I don't even know which way to go first, but yeah, just resonating deeply. I mean, with your story about like wanting to run around with your shirt off, that's also something that you said that, and I was like, oh my God, like I felt it in my body too. And it was like, yeah. And like not having that experience and not growing up in a family that, was open to like, let's look at this gender binary thing. Let's talk about transness. Let's talk about queerness. And so really being able to find that for myself later in life. And so, yeah, I guess I'm just remembering and feeling really excited about the conversation.
Thank you to both. When I think in masculinity, for me as a Latino, growing up, being young, it was very strict. It was determined by the society, those gender roles, how I was supposed to be seen in my community as a man, specifically those expectations. And when Pheng brought that question, of course, made me think a lot. I say, I don't know what to say. Now my vision of masculinity is totally different. It's more as an individual, understanding how harmful are the gender roles, how much harm patriarchy is causing to our society, and see masculinity not based in the societal expectation, but most as a human being, what I can do to create spaces where everybody feel respected regarding their gender, where not because I'm a heterosexual man or cisgender man, I need to be the one that need to provide. How we can start breaking those roles that cause so much harm, and how I can distribute, between my families, my circle, so we can empower ourselves. We can, learn to don't need to rely in that other person. Not as a man, you expect, when I wake up in the morning, that my spouse need to make my breakfast. So as a man, once I have an understanding of that harm, that patriarchy, and that unhealthy habits that bring masculinity, it opened my mind to become a better person, become a better role model. And it's challenging. I've been doing this work for now close to 5 years, and I keep learning. I keep finding new things that I need to work on. Listen to you, Matisse. Of course, I brought me a lot of childhood memories of those stereotypes and gender roles I was, that I had to follow regardless, just because otherwise I'll be seen bad by my community. So, it forced me to be in a specific way, so to continue causing harm to females and girls in my community. And thanks to opportunities like this is what they have opened in my mind. That's why you guys talk about liberation. Yeah, I can see that we need to start breaking all that harm that we're causing, but how we can do it in a way that is a way that's powerful for everyone, where we can put aside all that harm, understand that obviously that trauma exists, and I'm not responsible for other males that are causing harm, but what's my position, my role right now as an identified man to break that. So it's challenging. If you ask me if I can name it, I don't know how we can name it, but I see it like my values. How come my values can guide me to become a better person, how I can empower other people that have a different experiences, that have been going through a harder path than mine, and but do it in a way that we can show love and do it with that sense of of love and respect that we all individuals deserve. So
Yeah, I appreciate it. All the comments and the thoughts. I think, one of the things that came up from what you were sharing, Matisse, is the tangling and then like the untangling and the tangling of masculinity. I think especially for myself as a cisgender man, is to really be able to actually understand that relationship to masculinity, from how it came into my life, and then to untangle from there, and then to retangle again in a way that feels powerful, but feels powerful enough that it actually doesn't contribute to the harm in the environment, right? We are, I think we always say that us not speaking up as cisgender men condones and allows for the violence to actually happen. And so therefore I think that coupling and uncoupling, tangling and untangling, where you were talking about like coming in and out of relationship with masculinity, I think are two really intricate things that are parallel and that intersect in moments with understanding masculinity. And I think the other part of it is to really understand what that relationship looks like and what it requires at times, right? What is it asking as well too? And I think it reminds me of like my own understanding about masculinity, that it was so synonymous with being a man for us as cisgender men. I think Felix talked about this a little bit, but until we actually like hear stories from other folks' experiences and relationship with masculinity, then we are so clueless to it, right? I remember my own years ago where that was very synonymous, and I was just like, oh, okay. And then I needed to do the separating, and then being able to actually understand that relationship a little bit more and further, and coming to a place now where it's like, oh, I can actually be masculine and be in relationship with masculinity in a way that is actually healthy, quote unquote, and I can actually also embrace it, right? Embrace the beauty of it, right? And embrace the parts of it that I may not be in alignment with, but that other folks may be in alignment with, right? And so I think that's what's coming to my mind is just that. And the other part of it that I know I shared with you for sure is like, we have to broaden the definition, and the definition has to be very broad. And because if we are to create a new, a new way of being in relationship and community, that means that every one of us actually has a relationship with masculinity. It is not just men folks or male folks that only have it. So what does that mean? And how do we actually make definitions and terms that encompasses people's experiences with masculinity, right? The same with when we talk about femininity and other forms of expressions as well too, as folks.
Yeah, I can definitely answer like kind of like that first question. And no, you definitely weren't like talking a lot. I was actually like, though I was like waiting to hear the rest of what you had to say. So, but yeah, that question definitely like is a great question. Like, where do you even like, where does it start for most people? And for me, I grew up in the Bronx, New York. So inner city type, where it's like, yeah, it's really, that is really prevalent. Like to know, sadly, like whether you're like masculine or not, or to frame whether what masculine is or what it's not. Growing up, like I don't think I could fully remember like the first instant, like where somebody kind of told me. I definitely remember like instances where people were telling me like, oh, that's not what you do. That's not what boys do. That's what girls do. That's like gay, or that's not this. It was very like caging to an extent. Like I was like, damn, like, so what can I do? Like I can't be a fucking human. I almost felt like I was a robot to an extent. Like I can't be human if I can't cry, I can't laugh, I can't smile, I can't fucking wear pink, I can't like do the things that I want to do. Like how am I actually human? All of these are thoughts now that I think about. Obviously, I wasn't a child like revolutionary like that, but it was just like now that I thought about it, like I feel like once I got a better and a more like consistent and positive relationship with masculinity, I then had to like do my own soul searching and going backwards now of like, I'm thinking about all my relationships where maybe I use masculine in like the worst ways. Like I'm thinking about the way I've talked to people, especially like women. I'm thinking about like past relationships. I'm thinking about like all the times where I was like, damn, I was like aggressive there. I didn't hear her out there. I didn't hear them out there. I was like, oh, I need to be like in charge. So I feel like for me, like the first step for me, like was to actually do my own work and like, let me see like how I was like how I had the relationship with masculinity that I didn't know about or that I didn't come to understand. And it was definitely like icky, but it wasn't to the point where like you want to hang your head over it, right? Because it's like the one thing I've noticed, and especially like as a Black person, it's hard to hear, but one of the biggest things is like education, educating yourself, educating others around you, or obviously being open to education. A lot of men are obviously not open to education. We think that we know it all, the door is closed. And that's like the weirdest part too, is like, that's a form of like masculinity as well. It's like, oh no, I'm here. I know all the things. I get this down pat. It's like always weird to me when people will talk about like agendas and like pushing shit. And I'm like, no, people of other identities have been around before we were alive. So it doesn't make any sense that you get to say that they're pushing the, if anything, this was alive before you. So this is more credible than you are, if that makes sense. So yeah, for me, like I really had to like, yeah, I definitely had those moments for sure where parents or mom, aunties, especially cousins, a lot of my cousins are like male identified. So a lot of them are, yeah, that's not what we do. That's not what like males do. You don't do this. A lot of it is like kind of rushed as well. It's like very sad. I remember I did this like interview where I spoke about how like young boys, specifically when you grow up in those areas, it's very dangerous for young women because it's a sad equation. So the equation is a young boy not knowing who the fuck he is and not knowing what the fuck to do. And excuse my language, this is just how I am. So it's like young kids, especially young boys, not knowing what to do. Now you're also forcing them, like basically like shove it down their throat. Like, okay, by this age, you have to have a girlfriend. You have to have had sex. You have to have done these things to become a man, to become masculine. And what we don't realize is like the weight of telling somebody this with the struggle it really means to find that identity. Like somebody will and will always be hurt by that. And sadly, it's always been at the expense of women, children, people who don't identify as masculine or man. So that's one thing that I really, really had to think about. It's like, no, I really had to change my understanding of what masculine actually means. Go back, look at my relationship that I had with it previously, notice that I wasn't doing things the right way, identify how to change those things, not hang my head because I could sit there all day and never come to the conclusion of why I was taught these things, and then to grow from them. Like now I work with young kids, which is really, really dope. There's never going to be a time where they're telling me that they need to be a certain thing for themselves. I'm like, it's all you, whatever you want to be. You want to have long hair, you want to wear pink, you want to wear boots, you want to wear sneakers. Like life really is about like who you are and what you want to be. But I can't lie, because I'm like a realist too. Like that's never easy to say. Also, it's never easy to live, first of all. Because there are definitely people who have been hurt by that fact. And so I would never want to say things to make it seem like the shit is easy. I say it because it's important. It's definitely important for young kids to know that they can be and shine in the ways that they need to, but it's also very unsafe, right? So I'm the type of person that I provide duality in that way too. Like I'll even tell them like, hey, there's people who don't believe that. And, we got to help. We got to help them like understand that that's very harmful and that that's very like mean and that it doesn't help. But yeah, so I definitely provide both of those with the kids that I work with. Like I provide the, yes, be yourself, love that, but also identify who you can be safe around that with. Identify who you can be safe being yourself. Because yeah, I'm not going to sit here and pretend at all as a cis, heterosexual Black man that it's fucking easy to be who you are and that it's safe to be who you are. I can never sit here and lie. But I'll definitely tell the youth, like, I'm supporting you. I'm here for it. And it's, one person at a time. So yeah, like the last thoughts that I have like on masculinity in general, and like my relationship now is like, I love what Pheng said about like how we all have to have like a relationship with masculinity, like one where nobody's benefiting from it. Nobody's benefiting. And for damn sure, nobody's being hurt by it. Like that's my act. Like I was struggling with the question. I'm like, how do you even define it? I'm like, no, you can definitely define it. Like, it's like masculine in a way where everybody is having a relationship with it and nobody's being hurt. Nobody's benefiting more than another person. We're all coexisting under the umbrella of understanding like what masculine is. Whether you subscribe to it or not, it shouldn't be to the point where somebody's being hurt or somebody's overly benefiting from like like who they are as a person.
Absolutely. So many great points that you guys are raising. And, like one of the things that's coming up for me, I think returning to this question of like, how do we identify masculinity and, whose responsibility is it to engage with masculinity? And, like, I think that I had to move away from the question of like, how do I define my masculinity and really come to this place of like, regardless of how I'm identifying masculinity in this moment, my work is to try to identify patriarchy and where is patriarchy operating and how can I be in resistance to patriarchy, every moment that I could possibly recognize it and be in resistance to it. Because obviously I'm still working at that, and I will, as somebody who was raised under patriarchy, probably be working for the rest of my life, right, to like understand and undermine it. And I think this also brings up for me like my desire to broaden this conversation, not just with like cis folks and trans folks and folks who identify and recognize their embodiment of masculinity, but folks who don't. So women, girls, femmes, feminine people, because we all have a relationship to upholding patriarchy, right? And it's one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is like the ways in which, as a young person identifying with gender roles, I very much ascribe them to my younger brother. I remember policing his masculinity. Like one time he was dancing in his room by himself, and he just happened to be doing this like movement with his hips. And I went and I told on him, I tattled, right? And then later when I came out as queer, as like gay to my mother, she was like, I thought your brother was gonna be the gay one. And I was like, why did you think my brother was gonna be the gay one? And she was like, well, you remember when you caught him dancing? And I'm just like, now I'm just like, oh my goodness, I totally participated, in this policing of his gender, and I still feel bad about it. I had a conversation with my brother like a year ago where he's just like, yeah, I just don't feel confident as a dancer, like I don't feel comfortable doing it. My wife is the one that dances. And I'm like, no, bro, you can dance as much as you want, and I think that is one of the ways in which we're trying to, as we come into this creative space and looking at what's been taken away from us by these gender roles, one of the things that we're defining as liberatory masculinity is like a fully embodied experience. You can be in your body in whatever ways your body wants to express, and also looking at play, right? And the ways in which a lot of like capitalism and our social norms limit our ability to engage in play. Like even if you look at what's happening with children in elementary schools these days, right? They're cutting back on recess, they're cutting back on physical education, right? And they want us to be training on math and science and these things that, make us good workers later on when we graduate. And I think that there is a certain relationship to, limiting our ability to access the full knowledge and wisdom of our bodies through limiting our access to play, limiting our access to full embodiment and expression. And that patriarchy, does dictate that men don't move their bodies, in ways that are thought to be feminine, right? And so how do we stay in resistance to that? And the other thing I want to speak to really quickly is this idea of like masculinity's relationship to violence. And so one of the, I think, challenges I was having with locating my masculinity was that I had recognized that I deeply identified as gender nonconforming or gender expansive. So I'm like, if I'm a gender nonconforming person, then am I still masculine of center? Do I still need to deal with masculinity? And it really wasn't until I was in a moment where somebody was specifically talking about being attracted to masculine people. And I was like, oh, I'm masculine. I want to ask her out on a date. And so in those moments, I recognized I wasn't questioning masculinity, that it was like flying under my radar. And by stepping away from masculinity as being part of my identity, I was relinquishing my responsibility to interrogate when is it operating in my consciousness without me recognizing it, right? And I think that that's common in queer communities where we're strongly identifying with gender nonconformity and gender expansiveness, especially as a way to sidestep the violence of masculinity that we don't want to be associated with, right? And that brings me to the last point in terms of, where do we have these spaces to practice? Because obviously, it's not safe in a lot of our family systems, school systems, communities to push back against these gender roles. But one of the sites of practice that I've been trying to find ways to engage more is how do I understand my own expression of domination, like internally, right? So like the inner dominator is what Bell Hooks refers to it as. And so when we're talking about violence and other people doing violence, like I think it's important to recognize that and to intervene and prevent it whenever we possibly can. But then there's those moments where, it seems like it's those people over there and not me. And I'm going to use abortion access as like an example, right? Like when Roe was overturned in this country, I was like, I cannot believe we have a Supreme Court that would allow that to happen, right? And that would, be responsive to the movement of these folks who very much have been trying to control women's bodies for, for forever, right? But then I sat with it and I was like, when in my own life have I tried to control other people's bodies? And like I very much had a period of time when my mother made her own decisions about how she wanted to handle having cancer, where I was like, if I could, I would have taken that power from you and I would have made different decisions to extend your life, right? But it wasn't my choice. And it's, that would have been me using my power over her, right? And similarly, family members of mine who had abortions, like there are times where I would have used my power, if I could have, to have them make different decisions around, not getting involved with that dude in the first place. But that's another story. So like, I think that there's always these opportunities to look at where is the inner dominator operating in my own psyche, regardless of whether or not I'm involved in actively harming someone in this moment. And that's a place to like begin engaging with violence, right? As a lifelong practice that we oftentimes don't make space for.
Yeah, I think that that's so true, Matisse, what you shared there towards the end there. And I think that that's why it's so crucial in the month of domestic violence here for us to really make sure that when we talk about community safety, we have to include safety within our own homes, our relationships, and our bodies. Because exactly to your point, we always think that it's other people, it's happening over there. Let me make an intervention over there. Let me be a whatever. And then we think about protecting our families, right? From the violence that's actually happening outside. But when will the people within our homes be protected from us if we're actually the harm doer? How will they get the protection? Who will be protecting them? Right. And I think that that's a question and a conversation that we have yet brought to the forefront and has not been at the forefront of these conversations around community safety. When we've been talking about that ever since 2-3 years ago. It's been very visible. And these days I see all of the political ads and things like that around safety and violence increasing. But we know damn well that 90% of the people that commit crimes, they do it towards somebody that they know. Only 10% of it, and I don't want to dismiss that 10%, but that 10% they have exacerbated that 10% of like the person lurking in the bushes, the person that jumps out of the van and grabs you or whatever. Those kinds of stories, it happens. Those things are real, but the people who are in your home that are being harmed by somebody in the home is also very real. And it is the hardest thing to actually navigate, right? And I think what you pointed out there about like looking within ourselves and looking at like perhaps, I don't want to say the propensity, but like the opportunities, right? Because it is opportunities. It is. I always say that for us as cisgender men, violence is always the choice of violence is a low-bearing fruit. It's a low-hanging fruit that we can choose it at any moment exactly to I think some of the questions that you and statements that everybody has shared here as well too, and I know I've done it myself as well too, is enacting the policing of gender, which then causes gender-based violence to happen, which then causes sexual violence to happen, which then causes domestic violence to happen. All these are forms of gender-based violence, right? And so I think that yes, it is innate and it is incumbent on the individual to really make those kinds of understandings and really look within themselves and really understand their relationship to their experiences as a person, but their experiences with masculinity, with their expression, who they are and their identity, right? And we know this from studies of young people and kids in school, is having a good, healthy identity, whatever that case may be, really improves the health outcomes of that person, right? Whether it be a cultural identity, whether it be a language identity, whether it be a gender identity, really improves the health outcome of that person. you see people who I used to work with, young trans kid, and like depression will start going away. You know, if it is something that exists organically within the person's life, then obviously it won't. But if it is a result of people policing their gender and their gender expression and identity or sexual identity, then it starts going away the more that they come into who they are, right? So I just put that out. I know that we all have some idea around that, but I think it's so important for us to really honor that, especially for like young people, is to really honor their identities, where they're at, and allow for that exploration that the two of you were talking about, Sean and Matisse, that exploration of my own body and who I am. And I think people get like that there's boundaries around that. I'm not saying that kids should be like a free for all and whatever, but like that there is appropriate settings, to Matisse's point. There has to be, and we have to create environments that are appropriate for kids to do that kind of exploration. Like my 2-year old, he's touching his penis every day when we change his diaper, and he's wondering what it is. So you have to have language to tell him, and not be like, don't touch it. Oh, don't touch it. Just don't touch it. But like that, it's normal. Those are very normal things for a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old to be exploring their body, right? Or for your 4-year-old Sean and the 4-year-old Matisse to be running around and being free, and that is okay as well too. That's actually healthy development, is to do that, right? And then to be able to have appropriate words to describe and use to young people and young kids as well too, so that if sexual violence were to happen in any format, that they would be able to actually describe what happened, rather than using coded language that nobody would be like, we don't know what your wee-wee is, because everybody has a different definition of a wee-wee, right? So I just wanted to share some of those thoughts, that's what's coming up in my mind at this moment.
Thank you, Pheng. I agree so much. I'm loving this conversation. At the same time, when I think, in a definition for masculinity, it kind of scare me. Do we need to come with a definition of masculinity when we know we don't want to be boxed again in order to be considered masculine? So that's the question that I have right now, that I'm trying to come with something, because when we're trying to find a definition, I'm totally sure that definition will apply to female identified folks too. A lot of them based on our values of, and love and care. So yeah, do we really need to come with a definition, or it's more than that? So yeah, I'm struggling with that.
That's really interesting, Felix, because that's what I was thinking too, listening in, on the conversation. It's like thinking about how restrictive that man box is, or patriarchy, or however you want to frame it, right? It's like it's all about following these rules and not doing this and not doing that. So then, like, how do we define a healthier version of that, a healthier masculinity, where it does encompass all of the people who feel some sort of connection to masculinity, right? Like we've talked about women and femme folks and non-binary people who do have those interactions with masculine, attributes of their personality or whatever it is. I can think of so many people in my life who, firmly identify as women and yet really enjoy wearing men's clothes, and so like, that's interesting. If we define a new masculinity, or maybe it's not new, maybe it's remembering a masculinity before colonization, before white supremacy, before all of these violences entered in. But I think maybe it's just many definitions. It's like I remember at the beginning of my transition, and I was really, really thinking a lot about like, what kind of a man am I? What kind of a man do I want to be in this life? And how do I want to interact with masculinity? And the answer didn't come quickly, and I think it continues to come. It continues, we're constantly learning and witnessing how other masculine people in our lives are acting, or like the behaviors, or like the language, the way we talk to each other. And I feel like I'm constantly like, oh, noticing the harmful things, even within friendships and relationships. It's not just like it has to be like physically violent, but like the locker room comments and those things that we hear where it's like, oh, that's not the kind that I want to be. But this idea of like the expansiveness that is possible when we lift all of those restrictions and we say masculinity is what it means to you, Felix. Masculinity is what it means to me. And I think that's like really beautiful to think about there being just like countless definitions, and all of them are right for that person, right? So that just feels really expansively beautiful. And I think, queer and trans and non-binary communities, in my experience, have so many conversations like this, where we can sort of think beyond the gender binary. And yet I still fall into that pattern all the time, because it is so ingrained everywhere we look. It's, so it just feels really exciting to me to keep building, to keep connecting with more folks, like yourself, Matisse, and all of us here, who are really spending some time thinking and feeling into what our own masculinity is, and then like being able to witness other folks in the different ways that they show up and express theirs. It just feels really beautiful and diverse, and like how humanity should be and could be, maybe, and will be.
I just really like appreciated like a few points that I wanted to just kind of echo. One of which was like the identity piece from, like, I believe Pheng was talking about it, especially like with young kids, but in adults as well too, because in this world, a lot of us are finding parts of our identities later on in life, or finding who we are and later on in life in general. I just wanted to echo like just that support for it. Right? It's like a person. Like, I worked with youth, so I always say youth, but a youth or an adult is like basically they have found, right, the feel goods, the things, and they're just like joyous. They're like, I found it. Everything that I know to make me happy, to be a human, all the things that I figured out to be a human being, I've got it. And it's like they're yearning for you to be like, you're right. That is exactly what that means for you. And like, I just hope that me as like a, wouldn't say really a teacher, but as like an adult in people's life, that I hope that I never drop that ball. Because I know that I have people in my life who sadly have never gotten those parts of their identities back. And I could definitely believe that a lot of us know folks too who just never got those parts, because life is tough. Like, just imagine you're at that real peak of really knowing who you are, and somebody were to literally smack you down. Like, how would you most of us aren't going to get back up after shit like that. Like, and that's real stuff. Like, so I think just having that part of like supporting people's identities, and I feel like that's the rich part, is also looking into your own. Like, I really love that part, Matisse, about like looking into like who you are. Like, because I feel like for me especially too, it's like a journey. Like, masculinity is definitely going to be a journey because of different things like in my life. It's not a destination, because I recently was in like a partnership, so obviously I had to think about masculinity in that way. And now I'm single, so now I also have to think about masculinity in this way as well, like the duality of having those thoughts. And I think in general, that's just prime for me. Is always to go with like, go into your soul first, especially if you're like somebody that's going to help folks. If you're like a teacher, if you're an educator, if you're an advocate, any of those things, to definitely go into yourself and to be like, okay, what is my relationship with this before I even start to support other people? Like, I really had to dive into like, first of all, what I thought it meant to be a man, the failure of what I thought what it meant to be a man, and now to reinvent what it means to be a human being that has traits that I just love about myself. So I think that identity piece is really important. That looking in between yourself is really important. And then also like that exacerbation of the 10% is just like, it's weird as hell, but it's like you see it in like movies too, and media. It's so prevalent in movies and media, right? It's always the person hiding in the fucking bushes, or somebody in a house far, far away that's like doing these things to these people, but in all reality, it really is the person close to you, right? You see that young woman with, you know, marks and bruises, and you think she got into a fight over somebody different, and lo and behold, it's her partner. It's somebody who's close to her. It's a family member. It's somebody that's generally right around the corner from that person. So I think just echoing that is like, yeah, like I see sadly how it plays out a lot in our media, and that's the way that they, you know, that they get us, that they trick us, is by saying, yep, main people who commit those violences, the ones that you're not gonna know, right? So everybody's fine, everybody's good, but it's like, no, it is sadly sometimes the parents, the boyfriends, the brothers, the, you know, the cousins, the people who are related to you who commit a lot of those harms, or who don't support a lot of like people's identity as well.
Yeah, so much of what you said is really resonating. And so I guess the last couple of points that I just wanted to, I guess, maybe speak to that I think is in response to what we're talking about is I am challenging myself to, I guess, maybe not so much define masculinity as much as like my relationship to it. And that's why, you know, trying to engage with it from a liberatory place feels really important and really primary to me. And also, it's the site of like creative opportunity, right? And so for me, the creative opportunity is to say that liberatory masculinity is not binary, right? And so one of the ways in which I want to engage that statement intentionally is just around like really looking for opportunity for interconnectivity with femininity or interconnectivity in general, right? If we're like trying to really get out of the binary and not define masculine versus feminine. But like, and I feel like whenever I say this, especially in like queer and trans spaces, there's always a lot of resonance because those of us who were assigned female at birth, like recognize like, okay, like our outward presentation may be ascribed as masculine, but I still have a lot of connection to femininity, right? But then also, whenever we try to get into like, this is masculine, this is feminine, I feel like there's always something way to trouble that, right? Like care and nurturance as feminine traits. It's just like, no, anybody could be caring and nurturing, right? And so by engaging it as interconnected, I feel like it's resisting the initial separation that was enforced on us by the binary, right? And so I'll always probably start with liberatory masculinity is not binary. Another thing I wanted to just speak to was when Pheng was talking about the violence in the home and this 10% issue. And I very much appreciate that coming back up in Serrano's share because I feel like that's the tip of the iceberg, right? That we're seeing above the water are these folks who, you know, crawl out from the bushes and do this like horrendous thing. But the iceberg is actually, you know, there and much deeper and much harder to see and notice. And I think that there are the interpersonal dynamics in the home, you know, like in our relationships that, you know, we have to look at how do we protect the people in our home, but also how do we protect the parts of ourselves that we have like systematically, routinely attacked, right, within ourselves before we even direct it towards other people, right? The self-judgment, the self-blame, the self-dissociation that happens on a regular basis. And that's when I'm talking about the inner dominator piece, right? And where is that operating when I'm not even recognizing it? As I'm trying to reconcile with my own masculinity, I'm like, oh, I'm too fat to be masculine. And it's like, okay, where is that coming from exactly? Where I'm saying to myself, I'm enforcing this, that you have to lose weight if you're going to be respected as a masculine person, right? Like that to me is that to me, I feel like is where the violence starts, you know, and if we see it on a spectrum or if we see it as like the base of the iceberg, right? And then not stopping it at that place allows it to perpetuate to these like, you know, a culture where people can crawl up the bushes and attack folks, right? And so to try to address it on a cultural level, I think begins in this very intimate interpersonal space. And I think the last thing I was just going to say, like, I love what you're saying about returning to the self. And one of the things that we've been also trying to engage is how do we redefine power, right? So if we're recognizing that patriarchal power isn't what is working for us, what is another definition of power that we can rely on? And so we've been going to different thinkers and, you know, theologians. Paul Tillich talks about power as self-actualization plus love. And love is a process of both, you know, care, but also resisting separation, right? So all of the ways in which, you know, you were forced to dissociate, or society said that that was this and this was that, like, can we really engage the coming into yourself, the resistance of those roles, the resistance of recognizing that that doesn't work for you, coupling it with a love ethic that is powerful, right? And looking at that as like, okay, here's a different type of power that we can practice and that we can use as we work on liberating everyone. I know we're almost at time, so I'm going to stop.
All good, Matisse. Um, you know, these hour conversations are never um, long enough, right? And that's why we started the series in the kitchen table. So we'd love to have you come back so we can have and continue to have these conversations. I think that it's powerful, and I think it's fulfilling for sure, and it's healing at the same time as well too. And it makes many of us think, and many of the people who actually join us here or later really um, think deeper and wider about whatever topic that we're talking about. So I just wanted to say so much appreciation for you. And obviously, this is not the last conversation that we will have with you. We will continue this. We hope that those that joined us will continue it in their own homes as well too. But sort of pass it on to Sean to close us out here.
Thanks for that. And yeah, I'll just echo, just thank you, Matisse, for joining us here today. I know I was super excited to connect with you and just, woo, I've got a lot to be thinking about. And I definitely echo Pheng. We should definitely have you come back and join us again. And we can see what we've all figured out along the journey, as Serrano said. So we definitely want to thank Matisse and all of you for joining us for this 49th live kitchen table conversation here with the Men in Masculine Folks Network. We also want to take a minute to thank our funding partners, who are Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota and the Novo Foundation. We thank you for all of your support as we continue to hold these conversations every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. And very excited, 2 weeks from today, it will be, as Pheng mentioned, our 50th live kitchen table conversation, which is like, whoa, feels incredible. And how did time pass that quickly? And yeah, just thinking back to when we started these, you know, when COVID sort of first started. And so we're trying to do something fun for that. So definitely tune in 2 weeks on November 3rd at 12 p.m. Central Time for that 50th conversation. Don't forget to like our Facebook page, find us on YouTube. You can watch all of our previous conversations there, as well as on our Facebook page. And don't forget to have these conversations with your people, with your friends, with your family, with your colleagues, wherever it is. We really just are encouraging folks to try this out, to practice it in your own spheres of influence. So thank you again. We look forward to next time, and all of you take good care.